hope it works. There we are. So welcome everyone to our 2022 series of Lent art presentations. And our Holy Week theme at the Cathedral this year is Signs of Glory. And so our Art Tuesdays presentations are going to pick up this theme in diverse ways as we go through Lent. And this week, we're absolutely delighted to welcome Canon Howard Barker, whose presentation is entitled Contemplating the Christ, the Cell Frescoes of Fra Angelico. And Canon Howard will be exploring not only the frescoes themselves, but also the pattern of prayer which undergirded them, and will also consider what the paintings have to say to us today about signs of glory and how they might speak to our contemporary views of prayer and spiritual life. Through the magic of Zoom, Howard is joining us from the Isle of Wight, so much easier than the hovercraft. And he spent 20 years teaching art and the history of art and 40 years as a priest in this diocese. So it's great to have you with us, Howard. Welcome. And I shall hand over to you.
So I will press share screen, and I hope that works. Just one moment. Good. I think we're there, and it says participants should be able to see what's on the screen, and I hope that's
we can indeed, yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, that's excellent, and a great delight to be with you as part of this Lent course. And we shall be looking at a number of slides. I shall read a presentation which will take about half an hour, and then we can have questions and discussion after that. So Fra Angelico was a fine and very prolific artist whose work is to be found throughout Italy, but some of his finest is to be found in the Dominican convent of San Marco in Florence. He had the opportunity there to paint frescoes in each of the monastic cells, as well as in some of the key rooms, like the refectory and the dormitory and some of the corridors. All of them were painted specifically for the use of the friars, and together they represent a most remarkable and unique collection of paintings, illustrating aspects of the birth and life and death and resurrection of Christ. And this evening, as Catherine indicated, we shall be looking at the qualities of Fra Angelico as an artist, and also the contemplation of Christ according to strict Dominican principles, and then reflect on how these paintings can be used today. But above all, I hope these frescoes will point us to the theme for Holy Week, Signs of Glory, which is often interpreted as signs of unconditional love. And these are particularly beautifully illustrated in two paintings, one of the Annunciation and one of the Crucifixion. But they'll also help us to indicate the purpose of the frescoes in general in San Marco. And here, just as an introductory picture, we have a view of the cloister at San Marco. But we begin with this lovely painting of the Annunciation, which is found in cell number 3, which sounds a bit like prison life, but this was a Dominican monastery, and it's one of the loveliest paintings in Fra Angelico's entire work, a painting of beauty and simplicity. And the angel and Mary meet each other in a simple space, modelled on the cloister of San Marco and within a deep silence. And they gaze lovingly at each other, unusually the angel standing and Mary kneeling. It's usually the other way around in pictures of the Annunciation. And the Virgin's cloak is sketched in and then modelled in 3 values or 3 shades of a red wash. This would normally be preparation for a blue pigment to finish it off. But Fra Angelico has not used the expensive blue pigments like ultramarine traditionally found on Mary's robe. And its absence here may be a concession to the rule of poverty of a Dominican house and also serves to stress the Virgin's humility.
Beautiful.
But above all, we're conscious of the space between these 2 figures. Nothing separates them, and here earth and heaven are one. But they're not quite alone, for over on the left-hand side is a figure of a Dominican friar. And I want to say a word about this because it features in several of the paintings we shall look at. And the figure is there to remind the observer of the Dominican rule of prayer and to guide them in their contemplation. And this particular figure is St. Peter Martyr, but in other paintings, it's St. Dominic or other Dominicans appear instead. But we'll look at this further when we come to frescoes of the Crucifixion. And Mary's crossed hands indicate her response to the angel, "Let it be to me according to your word." And this fiat is echoed in the words of Jesus in the garden, "Not my will, but thine be done," which led to the cross. And both of these are signs of kenosis, or complete self-giving. So looking first at the Annunciation and then at this second fresco of St. Dominic with the crucifix, this is found not in a cell, but in a corridor used by the friars throughout the day. And it's set in an arid landscape. And these are life-size figures, Christ on the cross and St. Dominic kneeling at its foot. And the body of Christ, who is not dead, dominates the entire painting, a young and beautiful figure with blonde hair and strong features. And the painter went to some lengths to show Christ's humanity through the representation of his body, which is based on a careful study of Masaccio's fresco of the Holy Trinity, which is not far away in the Dominican church of Santa Maria Novella in Florence. And Fra Angelico's artistic gifts are seen here in the use of light to reveal the figure sharply. And light models the face and other parts of the body. And a fine brush shows that Christ's eyes and mouth are both slightly parted. And the figure of St. Dominic is just as compelling and is painted as a real solid in real space. Special emphasis is given to St. Dominic's right hand, with its precisely indicated veins and tendons and bones. But it's Dominic's face, which is key to this painting, and in some ways a key to understanding the whole of Fra Angelico's work at San Marco. The artist was particularly eager that the friars should regard this image of St. Dominic as absolutely true to life. His eyes are fully visible, reddened and flooded with tears. His brows are knotted, but above all, this shows him alone in prayer, when it was known that often in prayer he would be weeping or sighing or responding to whatever thoughts he may have been contemplating. And this fresco is echoed in the cells of the novices, each one of which had within it a fresco, not so much of the crucifixion, but rather a standard crucifix. And we'll look at one or two more in a moment, and you'll see that the figure of Christ is the same in each image. What there is the attitude of St. Dominic in prayer. And the novices were being taught about the basic textbook of prayer called De Modo Orandi, in which Dominic set out a number of hand gestures to be used when looking at a crucifix or other scene from the New Testament. And these included clasped hands, open hands, hands held in front of the chest or crossed over, and outspread arms. And these represented humility, humble reverence, adoration, meditation, and reading. So in most of the cells of the novices, there is a crucifix with St. Dominic in one or other attitudes of prayer. And here the hands held apart, and there are no other people.
They don't work very well, do they?
See. In this one, St. Dominic has his hands crossed across his breast. He holds his hands together across his chest as he looks up at the Christ. And in this third one, a black and white photograph, he's seen with his hands in prayer, looking up at the cross. So all the cells of the novices were had this crucifix or a version of it in them. But if we move to the cells of the lay brothers and the more experienced friars, we find just one or two scenes from the life of Christ, but in no particular order. But we'll begin in the right order with the Nativity, which is found in cell number 5. And the most important aspect of this painting is the silence that pervades the scene. And the whole painting is set in the context of a holy stillness, a peaceful silence in which the word of God can be heard and seen and received in the word made flesh.
Really?
And the figures are actually quite large, almost life-size. And in the background is a simple stable where an ox and ass feed from a manger. In front of the animals are Mary and Joseph kneeling in adoration, and on the roof are the angels who announce the good news to the shepherds on the hill. And on the ground is the baby, not wrapped in swaddling clothes, but lying on a mat, naked and vulnerable. It's an image of the great mystery of God who comes to us in the most amazing humility in the form of a weak and helpless babe. But there are also two other figures who were not there on the first Christmas night, and they are Dominicans. The woman on the left is Catherine of Siena, a local saint from Florence's neighbouring city, renowned for her holiness and her service to the sick and the poor. And the man kneeling on the right is Peter Martyr, whom we saw in the Annunciation. He was another Italian saint who was a fine preacher and a martyr. And they're present in the painting to teach the monks how to respond to this great event. through the appropriate hand gestures in stillness and prayer. And in front of the painting is a space for the monk living in the cell or for the observer to join the other figures and the angels in the picture to kneel in silent adoration. And when I visited Florence about 20 years ago and saw this painting, I had an overwhelming desire to complete the circle and join in with the other figures in adoration of the Christ child. And this too must have been the impression experienced by the friars who occupied this cell. It's quite small, and the life-size figures are almost overwhelming. And it's interesting to reflect on what
Howard, you've clicked on mute. You've muted yourself. Still on mute.
I'm so sorry. I muted everyone to stop the interference, and I managed to mute you, Howard, as well. So I've just asked you to unmute.
Oh, well, apologies for unmuting myself, Catherine. I'll put
Yeah,
my...
no, that's absolutely fine. I've clicked ask to unmute, Howard, but I think it should be. I'm just looking to see where. Perhaps, I wonder if it's difficult to see the mute button if you're screen sharing. I'm really sorry. Maybe if we go back to not screen sharing just for a minute, you'll be able to see the mute button and unmute. Ah, that's it.
Has that done it?
That's it. It's done it. I'm so sorry. If you could just possibly go back to about a minute's worth.
Yes. There we are. Yes. Is that all right? Are we back in business?
We are indeed back in business. I'm really sorry. And if people could possibly stay on mute, the other people, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yes. So let's move on then from there. Yes, we move to one or two images of the ministry of Christ, or the time between his birth and passion. He didn't aim to produce a series of narratives, but rather a number of set pieces. And we'll just look at a couple of those. This is the baptism of Christ, seen on a bare hilly landscape, stretching into the distance with the River Jordan bending into the foreground, and the dove of Christ surrounded by supernatural light. And once again, we have the Virgin and St. Thomas on the right-hand side witnessing the baptism. And then this painting of the Transfiguration is one of Fra Angelico's finest, found in cell 6. And it's clearly a set piece with Christ dominating the composition in an imitation of the cross. And he emerges from a mandala, or a sacred shape, which is reminiscent of many icons on this subject. And the three apostles cower at the foot of the mound, and once again, the Virgin and St. Dominic indicate how the friars should respond to this fresco through kneeling and through appropriate gestures. And then as we move to the events of the Passion and Resurrection, we find a number of frescoes which are again set pieces designed to evoke a prayerful response from the friars. And this institution of the Eucharist is from cell 35, 12 apostles, but arranged in an unexpected way. 8 of them are sitting at 2 tables, which are set together at right angles, and 4 have risen from their stalls to kneel in front. And among them is Judas, who's marked by a dark halo about his head. The faces of those seated can be seen in full, including the standing Christ. And the presence of the Virgin on the left is unusual as she kneels and prays. And through the open window, we can see across to the cloister opposite. And then this one of the mockery of Christ is most unusual, but very expressive and forward-looking. And it brings together a number of narrative events from the Passion into a single image. And the tormentors are portrayed against the plain background in abbreviated form. The Virgin and St. Dominic sit on the step below, and although they don't seem to notice, they're clearly meditating on these events. And then we have 3 small scenes which are more narrative than usual and much more colourful, and there's no Dominican in the scene to tell the lay brothers how to react. And all this suggests that they're by one of Fra Angelico's assistants. And this is of the Agony of the Garden, and we see 3 sets of figures in a kind of cascade across the frame. At the top of the left, Christ kneels and is comforted by the angel. And then below him, the 3 apostles, soundly asleep, each of them unnamed, on their halos. And then we see the home of Martha and Mary, who both have an attitude of reflection or prayer. And this leads us to the arrest of Christ, where Judas is marked out by a dark halo. And when he kisses Christ, the soldiers seize him. But their faces show more pity than violence. And Peter attacks the high priest's servant, and on the left, on the very left, the figure there with his hand raised is probably the high priest. And then this unusual fresco of Christ being nailed to the cross. It's rare in cycles of this kind to have the cross already in place, and Christ's head is inclined towards his mother, who is here supported by Martha. So, as we've seen, the theme of the crucifixion is central to the novices' quarter in the North Corridor. And this is one of the crucifixion with thieves, with Mary, St. John, St. Dominic, and St. Thomas Aquinas. And here Christ is still speaking to the good thief, and the words promising that he will be in paradise that day are written across the fresco in mirror writing. And St. Dominic stands in one of the listed prayer positions with his arms outstretched, and Thomas Aquinas on the right kneels on the ground holding a book. And again, we have to imagine what the impact of these life-size figures would be on the friar occupying this particular cell. Another of Fra Angelico's assistants probably painted this fresco of the Entombment, and the action takes place in front of the open sepulchre, and St. Dominic's right hand is raised in blessing on the scene of preparation. And so this amazing cycle of paintings is completed by two important resurrection scenes. And this one, called Christ in Limbo, tells the story of the tradition that between his burial and resurrection, Christ broke open the gates of Hades to release those who were imprisoned within. And this scene is recorded very dramatically in some of the Eastern Orthodox icons. And the use of light here is very dramatic, because the figure of Christ steps into the painting on the right-hand side, bringing light into the darkness, a light which is reflected on the many halos in the dark tunnel at the back. And the broken doors of Hades are shown in the front, and Christ grasps the hand of Adam, first of all Adam, to rescue him from the darkness. He's the one who'd been there for the longest time, and to pull him out, and then comes John the Baptist and other figures from Old Testament history. And one of the devils is seen escaping on the left-hand side. Much more traditional is Fra Angelico's description of Noli Me Tangere in cell number 1. This is very much in tune with paintings of the same scene by Giotto and later by Titian. Christ carries a hoe on his shoulder as Mary kneels in front of him near the open sepulchre at Christ's feet, and she longs to touch him. Christ's hand restrains her, but his natural desire to embrace her is indicated by the position of his feet. One foot steps towards her, but the other moves away, knowing that for them both the future lies in other directions. And there is in the garden a profusion of accurately painted plants and trees with a wicket fence at the end. However, we end with a painting which many consider to be Fra Angelico's best, and certainly his most well-known and most loved work of art, and one which of all his works is most in tune with contemporary approaches to contemplation. It's to be found at the top of a staircase leading up to the north corridor, where some of the monastic cells were situated, and it was central to the life and work of the community. And it wasn't an accident that the friars had to pass this painting several times a day, for it would remind them of the essential need to let things be, to surrender to the presence found in the present moment, and to become one with the one in whom we live and move and have our being. And the first thing to notice about this painting is the quality of light. The scene is illuminated by an invisible light source, particularly striking as you approach it from the staircase. Unlike most of his frescoes, Fra Angelico uses the recently developed skills of perspective to give the illusion of real presence. And at the same time, the painting has an uncanny sense of reality, which seems to suggest that the fresco is somehow embedded in the architecture itself, though the figures are gigantic in comparison with the architecture. And artists have depicted this story in many ways, This one shows us the point at which the angel and Mary commune in silence. Words have been spoken and received, and the space between them is still. And there is between them a point of intersection of the timeless with time, accentuated by the vanishing point just in front of the window. But in order to appreciate the full depth of this painting, we need to look at it just a little more closely. For another interesting aspect is the way in which it encourages us to consider the two dimensions in which we live, the earthly and the heavenly, the material and the spiritual. And it does so through the use of space, space that the artist himself has created. What we're really looking at here is a blank wall, but Fra Angelico has created a sacred space in which this divine encounter takes place. It's as though we're looking into a room or a loggia or a veranda, and by using the skills of perspective and light and shade, he's created a holy place where two dimensions come together, the divine and the human. And as you look at the painting, you'll see that the left-hand side and archway is occupied by the angel and the right-hand side by Mary. And between the two is a column. And this convention of separating the spaces is found in most paintings of the Annunciation. And it's accentuated here by the use of shadow. Gabriel, as an angelic being from another dimension, has no shadow. Yet Mary, as a human being, casts a shadow behind her by the stool. And it's important to notice that these two spaces, divine and human, are separated only from the point of view of the observer. But for Gabriel and Mary, they occupy the same space in which there is a coming together of heaven and earth. And becoming conscious of these two dimensions or ways of being is something that we all may experience at particular times in our life, perhaps when caught up in beauty or wonder or love. But this wonderful painting, as well as recording the Annunciation, is also, in a sense, an image of the heart, that sacred space within us, where more than anywhere our humanity and divinity come together. It is an open space, a space defined by the arches and columns, through which the angel enters easily from a garden on the left. It's also a simple space, quite uncluttered. Many paintings of the Annunciation show furniture, a lily, a dove, or a copy of the scriptures. But all there is in this space is a stool on which Mary sits to pray. And for the friars, it was a familiar space. They would have recognized the columns and the arches as exact copies of ones in the chapel and refectory of the priory. It's a space of encounter where two worlds come together. It's a place of preparation for watching and waiting, prayer and stillness, where heaven and earth are made one. And at the base of the painting, we can't see it here, but the artist wrote some words telling the brothers that every time they passed this picture, they should greet Mary, saying, Ave Maria, or Hail Mary, full of grace. And in a sense, this was a way of bringing the brethren into the present moment as they moved through the building, reminding them essentially of Mary's fiat. But as they passed along the corridor, they would also pass this fresco as well. And both the Annunciation and the Crucifixion were reminders of the letting be, the letting go of both Mary and Christ, which is what undergirds all these paintings, a path of acceptance, of surrender, a constant reminder to the community and to all of us of self-giving love. Indeed, the true signs of glory in which we live and move and have our being. So there we come to the end of these frescoes, and I think if I press stop share, we shall be back in business. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. That was beautiful and fascinating. Does anyone have any questions or comments or observations? Arlene.
How are the frescoes preserved? Are they as bright as they appear on your pictures?
Well, that's very interesting. The whole art of making frescoes was to paint on wet plaster. And this meant that it had to be done very quickly, which is amazing when we consider the quality of these paintings. But being painted onto wet plaster meant that they were then preserved. The contrast to that is the famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci of the Last Supper, in which he tried painting on dry plaster. And we all know that that led to disastrous results. It all flaked and crumbled. And what we see now wasn't what he originally painted. But what was happening when Fra Angelico was here was that the whole monastery was being refurbished. It was a gift to them from Cosimo de' Medici, and the architect and Fra Angelico had the chance to refurbish it. So all the corridors, all the rooms were all plastered afresh, and he was able to work in that way over several years. But that's why I think they are so fresh and why they've been preserved for so long.
And another question. On the fresco where the Christ is with the two thieves, and there's the two brothers in the front, and then Mary, right in the foreground, there is a skull. Would that mean a conquering of evil, over evil? Did he have a real purpose other than just the obvious as to what he added to his frescoes?
Yes, that skull appears in several of those paintings of the Crucifixion. It's sometimes called a Memento Mori, a reminder of death, a reminder to anyone looking at it that in the end we all pass the same way, and it would be there to encourage the friars to contemplate their own death as well as the death of Christ. And it features very much in the other painting I mentioned, the Holy Trinity by Masaccio, which is in a neighbouring church, where right at the bottom there's not just a skull but a whole skeleton lying up to remind people that we're all mortal and that we are but dust.
Any other questions? Anthony?
Just trying to work out exactly what my question is, but I was just reflecting as you were speaking, Howard, that when an artist paints, especially nowadays, they don't know who's going to see their work over the lifetime of the artwork.
Yeah.
yet it seems like Fra Angelico knew exactly who was going to be seeing his artwork because of the context in which it was placed. And I've never, I can't think of artworks that are more painted with the viewer in mind and trying to have a particular effect on the viewer. So that just really struck me from your presentation. Sorry, it's not really a question, but I was just intrigued by that aspect of what you brought out. So yeah.
That's absolutely true. They were designed specifically for those who lived in the building. Some of there are some in the corridor, especially the Annunciation and the Crucifixion with St. Dominic, where other people might occasionally pass by it and see it. But essentially, they were painted for the friars for their own meditation and contemplation. And it's only in later times that other people have been able to see them. And they are some of Fra Angelico's finest paintings, but it's amazing, as you say, that they were for that very limited group of people.
I suppose he could know he wouldn't have ever been able to imagine the age of mechanical reproduction, which I guess we got in the 20th century onwards, whereby images like that could become mass produced and indeed become sort of, you know, Christmas cards and all kinds of things and be so. And yet do you think, you know, Fra Angelico, the power of these images can survive, you know, being on 1 million Christmas cards?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, the actual impression of being in one of those cells with the paintings is very, very powerful. And it must have had a huge impact on those who lived there in quite tiny cells with these life-size figures. And that's what they were painted for. But I mean, it's good that more of us can share them now, but yes, they do lose their value when they're not used in the way that he originally envisaged.
Yeah. Carol.
Do you suppose that each novitiate or monk lived in the same cell all the time he was there? Would they get a chance to live with another one of them somewhere else?
No, that's again a very good question, which I should have said. They were in a cell for a while and then would move on to another cell, so that they would have the opportunity to reflect on a different painting. There doesn't seem to be any kind of logical order. You'd think that cell number 1 would be Nativity, and then cell number 2 and 3, and so on. It didn't go like that. The novices' cells were, each one had a crucifix in it, and was really a way of teaching the Dominican style of prayer. And some of the more colourful ones were in the lay brothers' cells. Most of the paintings are fairly austere in their colours. When he was really left to himself and given the chance to paint a wonderful altarpiece, Fra Angelico would let himself go and have brilliant colours. But yes, the idea was that you would move on from one cell to another and absorb over a period of time what that particular fresco had to offer. And usually there was a figure of St. Dominic somewhere around to encourage you to have the right way of looking at it and responding to it.
So do responses from these monks about how they felt about the artwork in their cells? Do we know how they, well, I mean, I can imagine some people having nightmares, you know, it would be pretty horrific at some stages. Did they ever write anything down? I was interviewed, obviously, for BBC. And how did you feel about having Crucifixion Christ look at day and night? Or, you know,
No, I don't know of any reactions to it by the friars. We have to remember, I think, that this particular order of friars were basically teachers and preachers, and the idea was that they would absorb all this in their cells and then go out to preach. So there would have been people at the time who would have benefited from their experience in the friary with these images, but I don't think that any of them wrote down their reactions to it. But I was certainly very impressed by visiting this particular place and being in the rooms. It's not really a kind of brainwashing, but there's a powerful influence at work when you have to live in a room like that with figures, and particularly for the novices living in cells with the crucifixion, it was quite a rigorous form of disciplined meditation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I was very struck by the mockery of Christ and the almost, I mean, it reminded me a little bit of Dali or something with those disembodied hands.
Yeah.
It seemed quite different from the others, and you know, he ranges from the quite stylized to being really very innovative, doesn't he? And you know,
yeah.
Was there anyone else around at that time who was painting like that, or was he very much out on his own?
No, I think he was very much on his own in that style of painting. It's interesting to contrast his work and the views of the Dominicans with the Franciscans at the time. They were much more concerned with narrative, with telling a story, with expressing emotion and feeling, whereas what Fra Angelico was trying to do was really to present some set pieces on which the monks could reflect, possibly in a more intellectual or theological way, rather than feeling about it. So in that one of the mockery, you've got a package really of bringing together a lot of the things that he suffered, but a Franciscan would have painted that in a very different way. But yes, it's that particular one is a very, very modern presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Anyone else?
I thought the Transfiguration also has some kind of disembodied
Yes.
heads, which were the closest I think we got to that style in any of the other ones. I presume that was Moses and Elijah, but it was interesting they were represented in that slightly, I don't know,
yes,
unusual way.
Yeah. And again, a bit reminiscent of some of the icons that were made of that, of the Transfiguration, which was a popular theme in the Eastern Orthodox Church, where again, you sometimes find just disembodied heads or little parts shown there. Yeah.
May I ask something entirely different? This is just a detail really, but I think in the St. Dominic's halo, I think had a red star in it. Is there any particular significance to that you're aware of?
No, not that there probably is, but I don't know what it represents.
Yeah.
Stars, the traditional stars on Mary, were of course to show her virginity, past, present, and future. 3 stars usually. But I didn't know what that one was about.
Okay, no, nor me. I hadn't noticed that before, although I've seen lost the. I'll have to try Googling it.
Yes. Yes. All the answers are to be found there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Howard, thank you so much, and also for really helping us to think through the spiritual dimension of these amazing frescoes. And I'm definitely going to take away that very well-known image of the Annunciation, but seeing it in that light of self-giving love and the meeting of heaven and earth in our hearts, which is just a beautiful image for us to take away for this week. So thank you so much.
Not at all. No. And
Yes, do unmute. And apologies again for muting you in the middle. I shall know next time that participants include the speaker. Well, next week we have another priest and art historian who is going to speak for us, Harriet Neal Stevens, who is coming to us from the Diocese of Chichester. And for anyone who came to Art Wednesdays last year, she will be familiar to you. This year, she is looking at gospel themes in 20th century art. So do, if you can, join us at the same time on Tuesday next week. Thank you so much, Howard, and thank you, everyone.
and thank you, Catherine.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.